The rain was coming down in sheets, cold and heavy, soaking through my thin wool coat in seconds. I stood in the shadows of the old oak tree across the street, staring up at the sprawling, multi-million-dollar smart mansion my son had designed and built from scratch. It was a fortress of glass and steel, perched on the highest hill in the neighborhood. Through the massive windows on the ground floor, I could see the warm, golden glow of a lavish party. Silhouettes of people in expensive suits moved with champagne glasses in hand, laughing over the heavy thumping bass of a sound system. From the outside, it looked like a picture-perfect life, but my eyes were not fixed on the party. I was staring at a tiny, almost invisible security light positioned near the garage door. It was flashing in a deliberate pattern. 3 short bursts. 3 long bursts. 3 short bursts again. ... Dash, dash, dash. ... It was an SOS. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the freezing rain. When my boy, Mateo, was just 10 years old. We lived in a rough neighborhood. I worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Washing dishes at a diner until midnight. I was terrified something would happen to him while I was gone. So, I taught him Morse code. I told him to tap it on the pipes if he ever needed me and could not speak. He promised me he would never forget it. And now, 20 years later, that same desperate signal was blinking from the state-of-the-art security system of his own luxury home. Something was terribly wrong. My daughter-in-law, Elena, had texted me just 2 hours ago, saying Mateo was sick with a terrible flu and that they had to cancel our family dinner. She said he was resting in the master bedroom and could not be disturbed. But a mother knows the scent of a lie. And that flashing light confirmed my darkest fears. I did not pull out my phone to call the police. In this part of the city, the private security patrols work for the homeowners. If I raised an alarm without knowing what was happening inside, I could be putting my son in immediate mortal danger. I had to get inside. I pulled my hood up and sprinted across the slick asphalt, my old boots splashing quietly in the puddles. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall of the mansion, avoiding the sweep of the main security cameras. Mateo had built this house to be impenetrable. It had biometric locks and a central artificial intelligence system that controlled everything. But he was also a practical architect. He had once told me, in secret, about a physical override. A back door meant only for emergency maintenance. Completely disconnected from the network, I crept around to the side garden, pushing past the heavy, wet leaves. There, hidden behind a thick patch of ivy near the foundation, was a small metal panel. My hands were shaking from the cold and the adrenaline as I pried it open. Inside was an old mechanical keypad. I punched in the sequence. It was my birthday. The day, the month, the year. The heavy steel door clicked and popped open just an inch. I slipped inside and gently pulled it shut behind me, plunging myself into the pitch-black darkness of the utility corridor. The air smelled like damp concrete and ozone. Above my head, I could hear the muffled footsteps of the guests and the rhythmic thumping of the party music. I fumbled in the dark, keeping one hand on the cold wall to guide me. This corridor ran adjacent to the basement. Mateo had turned the basement into a massive, soundproof home theater. I reached the end of the passage and found the maintenance hatch that opened directly behind the projection screen. I eased the hatch open. Just a crack. The theater was dimly lit by a single emergency bulb near the floor. The soundproofing was so perfect that the party above was completely silenced. It was like stepping into a tomb. I crawled out from behind the screen and froze. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, agonizing gasp. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop the scream from tearing out of my throat. In the center of the room, tied to a heavy leather recliner, was my son. My beautiful, brilliant boy. His expensive dress shirt was torn to shreds and soaked in dried blood. His head was slumped forward, his face a mess of purple bruises. But the sight that made my heart shatter was his right arm. It was twisted at a grotesque, unnatural angle, clearly broken. Secured tightly to the armrest with thick plastic zip ties, a heavy steel chain was wrapped around his chest, padlocked to the base of the chair. He was not sick in bed. He was a hostage in his own home. I rushed to his side, dropping to my knees on the plush carpet. I reached out with trembling hands, gently touching his bruised cheek. His skin was ice cold. "Mateo," I whispered, my voice breaking. "My baby. I am here." He groaned. A weak, rattling sound deep in his chest. His swollen eyes fluttered open. When he saw my face, a look of absolute terror washed over him. "Mom," he croaked, his lips cracked and bleeding. You have to get out. They are going to kill us." "Who did this to you?" I demanded, my tears mixing with the blood on his face as I tried to pull at the plastic ties binding his broken arm. "Tell me who did this, Elena." I gasped, fighting for every breath. "Elena and Marco." Marco broke my arm. "They want the trust fund. They want everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. Elena, the woman who smiled so sweetly at our Sunday dinners, and Marco, her degenerate gambler of a brother. They were up there right now, drinking champagne, while my son bled out in the dark. The illusion of my perfect family shattered completely. The warmth of a mother's love was instantly swallowed by a cold, calculating fury. I had scrubbed floors until my knees bled to pay for his education. I had built the foundation of his life with my own bare hands. And these leeches thought they could torture him and steal it all. They had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated a mother who had nothing left to lose. I wiped the tears from my eyes. The shaking in my hands stopped entirely. I was no longer an old, worried woman. I was a predator cornered in the dark. And I was going to tear their world apart. "I am not leaving you," I said, my voice dropping to a low friend of air. Hard whisper. "I am going to get you out of here." Suddenly, the heavy metal clank of the elevator engaging echoed through the silent room. The digital display above the theater entrance lit up. The elevator was descending from the ground floor. "They are coming back." Mateo choked out, his eyes wide with sheer panic. "Mom, hide please." Hide. There was no time to run for the hatch. I scrambled backward, diving into the deep, dark alcove behind the massive velvet curtains just as the elevator doors chimed and began to slide open. I pressed my body flat against the cold concrete wall behind the heavy velvet curtains. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Heavy footsteps stepped onto the plush carpet. Then came the sharp click of expensive high heels. "Is he still breathing?" a woman asked. Her voice was smooth and elegant. It was Elena, the woman who married my son, the same voice that called me Mom at our family dinners, the same voice that stood at the altar and promised to love him in sickness and in health. Hearing it now made my stomach turn with a violent, sickening twist. Barely. A man grunted. Marco, her older brother, a violent man with a severe gambling addiction and eyes like dead coal. I peeked through a tiny gap in the thick curtains. The emergency light cast long, twisted shadows across the room. Marco stood over my son. He was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than I made in an entire year of hard labor. Elena stood a few steps back near the expensive leather sofa. She was holding a crystal glass of champagne. She looked completely bored, as if she were waiting in line at a grocery store. "Wake up!" Marco shouted. He slapped Matteo hard across the face. The sound echoed in the soundproof room like a gunshot. My son groaned. His head snapped back. Blood spattered onto the pristine white leather of the chair. My hands balled into fists so tight, my fingernails pierced the skin of my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear Marco apart with my bare hands and teeth. But I stayed completely still. Watching. Waiting. I knew if I stepped out now, I would only get us both killed. Time is running out. Marco hissed. He grabbed Matteo by his torn collar and pulled his bruised face close. The cartel is not going to wait forever. I owe them $2 million. If I do not pay them by tomorrow morning, they are going to skin me alive. And then they are going to come for your lovely wife. Matteo coughed. He spit blood onto the carpet. You are insane. I will not sign over the trust fund. It is everything I worked for. Marco laughed. It was a cruel and ugly sound that bounced off the acoustic panels. He reached down and grabbed the broken right arm of my son. He twisted it. Matteo let out a muffled scream of absolute agony. My heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I bit down on my own lip until I tasted warm blood just to keep myself from crying out. You do not have a choice, Marco roared. You are going to sign the transfer. You are going to sign over the equity in this house. Or I will break your other arm. And then I will go find that pathetic old mother of yours and burn her cheap house to the ground. Elena stepped forward. She took a delicate sip of her champagne. Just do it, Matteo. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Her voice was chillingly calm. The investors upstairs think you are dying of a sudden heart condition. I have all the legal paperwork ready. Once you sign, we will call the ambulance. We will say you fell down the stairs in a fever dream. If you die on the way to the hospital, well, tragic accidents happen. She smiled. A cold and empty smile that sent ice through my veins. She was planning to kill him anyway. She was going to take his money and let him die to cover their tracks. Tears of pure rage streamed down my face in the dark. I looked at the solid concrete walls of this basement. I remembered the day Matteo laid the foundation for this house. He was so incredibly proud. He told me this house was built on the sacrifices I made. I remembered scrubbing greasy pans in the diner kitchen until 2 in the morning. I remembered smelling like bleach and cheap soap every single day. I remembered walking 5 miles in the freezing snow because I could not afford the bus fare. I saved every single penny. I bought him his first drafting table. I paid for his architecture degree with my own sweat and blood and tears. I built the foundation of his life, and now these parasites were using his own beautiful creation as a torture chamber. They thought because I was an old woman from a poor neighborhood I was powerless. They thought we were weak and easy to crush. They were wrong. So incredibly wrong. The love of a mother is not just warm hugs and bedtime stories. It is a shield of solid iron. And when that shield is tested by monsters, it becomes a deadly weapon. Marco pulled a sleek black tablet from his inside jacket pocket. The screen glowed brightly in the dim room, illuminating his wicked face. Last chance. Marco growled. Press your thumb here. Authorize the digital draft. Matteo shook his head weakly. No. Marco did not hesitate. He punched my son deep in the stomach. Matteo gasped for air violently. While he was choking, Marco grabbed his limp right hand. He forced the bloody thumb of my son onto the glowing scanner of the tablet. The machine beeped twice. A green check mark appeared on the screen. Perfect. Marco sneered. He wiped the screen on the torn shirt of my son. Is it done? Elena asked. She glanced nervously toward the ceiling, where the heavy bass of the party music vibrated. The guests are asking questions. The main partners need my signature to finalize the corporate takeover before midnight. This was just the biometric draft. Marco explained. The system requires the final master approval from the primary server room. We have to go upstairs to the master suite. Once I plug this tablet into his mainframe, all the money transfers to my offshore account. Then we come back down here and finish him off. He looked down at Matteo with pure disgust. You have exactly 1 hour to say your prayers. Marco turned around and pressed the elevator button. Elena finished her champagne and set the empty crystal glass on a speaker cabinet. She did not even look back at her bleeding husband. The doors opened. They stepped inside. The elevator carried them back up to the world of bright lights and loud music and filthy lies. The heavy silence returned to the basement. I waited 10 agonizing seconds to make sure the elevator was truly gone. Then I threw the heavy velvet curtains aside. I scrambled across the floor on my hands and knees. Matteo, I cried out softly. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at me through a thick haze of pain and fear. Mom. I told you to run. I am never leaving you, I whispered fiercely. I grabbed the empty champagne glass from the speaker. I smashed it violently against the concrete floor. I picked up a large, jagged shard of thick crystal. I began sawing frantically at the thick plastic ties holding his broken arm to the chair. Listen to me, I ordered. My voice was trembling but full of fierce determination. They need the server room upstairs. We have less than 1 hour. Tell me how to stop them. Matteo groaned as the first plastic tie finally snapped. He looked up at the ceiling with a desperate glimmer in his swollen eyes. The vents. Mom. You have to go into the walls. I pressed the jagged piece of crystal against the thick plastic binding his wrist. I sawed back and forth with all my strength. My hands were slick with his blood. The sharp edges of the broken glass cut deep into my own palms. But I did not care. I felt absolutely no pain. All I felt was a burning desperation to free my child. With a loud snap, the plastic tie finally broke. Matteo slumped forward instantly. His broken arm fell limply to his side. He let out a muffled cry of pure agony. I dropped the glass and caught him before he hit the concrete floor. He was a grown man, a successful architect. But in my arms right now, he was just my little boy again. He was so heavy and so incredibly cold. I have you, I whispered, rocking him gently in the dark. Mom is here. I have you. He leaned his heavy head against my shoulder. He was shivering violently. His breathing was shallow and erratic. They are going to kill me. He sobbed quietly. Elena. She stood right there. She watched him break my arm. She smiled. Do not think about her right now, I commanded. My voice was strict and steady. I could not afford to break down crying. If I panicked, we would both die in this basement. We are going to get out of here. I will call the police. I will scream until the neighbors hear us. Matteo grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly tight for a man who had lost so much blood. No, I gasped. Do not call the police. You cannot. Why? I asked, brushing his sweaty hair out of his swollen eyes. They are torturing you, the party upstairs. He coughed. spitting a dark glob of blood onto the floor. Elena did not just invite investors. She hired private security, mercenaries from a private firm. They are wearing expensive suits. They are mingling with the guests right now. They have guns. Mom, if you trigger an alarm or call the local police, the guards will lock down the front gate. Marco will come back down here and shoot me in the head long before a single patrol car ever reaches the front door. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was not a simple robbery. This was a highly orchestrated corporate execution. They had turned my son into a hostage inside a heavily guarded fortress of glass and steel. Then how do we stop them? I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He forced your thumb on that glowing screen. He said he has everything he needs. Matteo shook his head weakly. A tiny spark of defiance flared up in his bruised eyes. Marco is an idiot. Matteo breathed heavily. He is a thug. He does not understand how my house actually works. That biometric scan on his tablet was only step one. It drafts the legal transfer. But a trust fund of this size cannot be emptied from a portable device. He paused to catch his breath. His chest heaved with the effort. To finalize the transfer, Marco has to take that tablet upstairs. He has to plug it directly into the master server mainframe. The server is hidden behind the large abstract painting in our master bedroom. If he connects the tablet, the money moves. The deed transfers. He pays the cartel. And I become entirely useless to them. When will he do it? I asked, feeling a cold sweat break out on my neck. Midnight. Matteo whispered. The international banking protocols update at midnight. He has to wait until exactly then to bypass the fraud alerts. We have less than 45 minutes. 45 minutes. My heart hammered against my ribs. There is something else. Matteo continued, his voice growing slightly stronger with the adrenaline. Marco put the house in party mode. He overrode the main security cameras so the investors would not see his armed guards on the screens. He thinks there is no record of what they did to me down here. Matteo looked at me. His eyes were wide and desperate. But I built this house. Mom, the basement cameras are hardwired. They do not connect to the cloud. They record straight to a physical hard drive locked inside that same master server upstairs. Untouched, unedited. It caught everything. The assault, the extortion, the cartel confession. If you can get into that server room, you can download the footage. You can lock them out of the financial system completely. The ultimate weapon. The definitive proof. If I could get my hands on that server, I could send both of these monsters to prison for the rest of their miserable lives. I could expose Elena for the gold-digging psychopath she truly was. How do I get up there? I asked quickly. The stairs are guarded. The elevator is monitored. The ventilation system. He pointed with his good hand toward the dark utility corridor outside the theater. I designed a massive industrial heating and cooling shaft to keep the wine cellar climate-controlled. It runs straight up through the core of the house. It leads directly to a floor vent inside the master suite closet. He looked at my small frame. He looked at my rough hands. It is a tight squeeze. He whispered, "But you can fit. You are the only one who can fit." I looked at the heavy steel chains still padlocked around his chest. I could not break those. I could not carry him out of here. If I stayed down here with him, we would simply die together. I had to become the weapon he needed. I had spent my entire life working invisible jobs, cleaning houses, washing dishes in the shadows. Nobody ever noticed the cleaning lady. Tonight, my invisibility was going to be their absolute downfall. I took off my heavy wool coat. The air in the basement was freezing, but I did not care. I wrapped the thick coat tightly around the shivering shoulders of my son. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, looking deep into his eyes. "I am going to climb into those walls. I am going to find that room. I am going to take everything away from them. You just focus on breathing. Do you understand me?" Matteo nodded slowly. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Be careful." "Mom, please. I survived 20 years in the slums, raising you alone," I said fiercely. "A couple of rich cowards in a smart house do not scare me." I helped him slide backward into the deepest shadows behind the heavy velvet curtains. I covered his legs so he was completely hidden from the main floor. Then I turned and slipped out of the theater. I ran down the dark concrete utility corridor. My old joints ached with the cold, damp air. I found the massive steel panel marked for primary air return. I grabbed the heavy latches and pulled. The metal groaned and swung open. A blast of freezing, dusty air hit me right in the face. I looked inside. It was a pitch-black vertical tunnel of sheet metal rising straight up into the belly of the mansion. I took a deep breath. I reached out and grabbed the first freezing rung of the internal maintenance ladder. I pulled myself up into the darkness. The hunt had officially begun. The metal of the ventilation shaft was like a block of solid ice against my bare arms. I pulled myself up, rung by rung, into the pitch-black throat of the house. The air up here was thick with decades of trapped dust. It coated my throat instantly. I wanted to cough. A violent, hacking cough. But I bit down hard on my own tongue. The taste of copper filled my mouth. I focused on the pain to keep myself completely silent. I reached the horizontal main duct. It was narrow. Too narrow for a normal man, but my body had been starved and worked to the bone for 20 years. I flattened myself against the cold, galvanized steel and began to crawl. I moved like a rat in the walls of a palace. Every inch was pure agony. My knees scraped against the metal joints. The cuts on my palms from the broken crystal throbbed with every movement, but every time I felt like stopping. Every time the claustrophobia threatened to crush my chest. I saw the image of my son chained in the dark. I saw his twisted, broken arm. I kept crawling. A faint rectangle of light appeared ahead. It was a large return vent overlooking the main grand foyer. I dragged myself toward it. I pressed my face against the dusty metal slats and looked down. The contrast between my dark prison and the world below made my stomach churn. The grand foyer was a sea of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over the polished marble floors. Waiters in crisp white shirts floated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and caviar. It was a gathering of the elite. Partners from the architectural firm, wealthy investors, high-powered lawyers in custom suits. And floating right in the middle of them all was Elena. She looked absolutely radiant. She was wearing a stunning backless silk gown. Her hair was perfectly styled. She was holding a glass of wine and laughing a bright melodic laugh. It was the performance of a lifetime. "Elena, dear," an older man with silver hair called out. He was the senior partner at the firm of my son. "Where is our star architect tonight? We cannot toast to the new corporate merger without Matteo." Elena placed a delicate hand over her heart. Her smile faded into a mask of perfect practiced sorrow. "I am so sorry, Richard." She sighed beautifully. "Matteo is terribly ill. He came down with a sudden aggressive fever this afternoon. The doctor gave him a strong sedative. He is resting upstairs in the master suite." "Oh, how dreadful," the older man said with sympathy. It breaks my heart. Elena lied smoothly. But he insisted the party must go on. He gave me his full power of attorney just this morning. He wants me to handle the final corporate signatures at midnight. He trusts me completely. Bile rose in my throat. I wanted to smash through the metal grate. I wanted to drop down into the middle of that lavish party and scream the truth. I wanted to grab her by her expensive silk hair and drag her down to the basement to show these wealthy fools what she had done to her husband. But I stayed completely still. Screaming would only get Matteo killed. These investors were her perfect alibi. They were her witnesses. They were watching the devoted wife taking over the business while her husband slept. I forced my eyes away from the glittering hall. I crawled deeper into the dark. I followed the blueprint Matteo had whispered to me. Take the left fork at the primary junction. Follow the warm air toward the master suite. The duct sloped slightly upward. I pushed forward on my bleeding hands. Suddenly, my elbow bumped against a loose steel rivet. Clack, the sound was tiny. But inside the hollow metal tube, it echoed like a dropped hammer. I froze instantly. I stopped breathing. Below me was the second-floor hallway. I peered through the nearest floor grate. A massive man in a tailored black suit was pacing the corridor. He was one of the private mercenaries. He wore a coiled earpiece. His jacket was unbuttoned, revealing the heavy black grip of a pistol holstered at his hip. He stopped dead in his tracks. He tilted his head, listening. He stepped directly under the grate where I was hiding. He looked straight up. His cold, dead eyes stared directly at the dark slats. He could not see me in the shadows. But he knew something was up there. He reached under his jacket. He pulled out a high-powered tactical flashlight. He raised his hand toward the vent. If he turned that light on, he would see my face. He would radio Marco. The game would be completely over. Panic flared in my chest, but my survival instinct overrode it. I looked frantically around the tight, dark space. Right next to my shoulder was a small plastic junction box. It fed the recessed lighting for the hallway below. The guard placed his thumb on the flashlight button. I did not think. I reached out and ripped the plastic cover off the junction box. A bundle of colorful wires spilled out. I grabbed a thick red wire and a black wire with my bare hands. I yanked them violently in opposite directions. Sparks erupted in my face with a loud pop. A sharp jolt of electricity bit into my fingers. Instantly, the entire second-floor hallway plunged into pitch-black darkness. The lights had short-circuited. Damn it, the guard cursed loudly below. He dropped his flashlight to draw his weapon. He pressed his hand to his earpiece. Command, this is Corridor 2. We just lost main power on the second floor. Smells like an electrical short. Send maintenance up here. He moved away from the vent, walking cautiously down the dark hall with his gun drawn. I let out a slow, trembling breath. My hands were shaking and smelling of burnt plastic. But I was alive. I dragged myself the last 20 feet down the freezing metal tube. The air grew warmer. I saw the final grate ahead. This was it. The master suite closet. The end of the line. I crept to the edge and looked down. The master bedroom was massive. It was decorated in cold, modern grays and whites. On the far wall was the large abstract painting Matteo had mentioned. The server mainframe was hidden directly behind it. I pushed the vent cover slightly. It was unlatched. Ready to swing open, I prepared to drop down into the room. But then, a shadow moved across the floor. I stopped. I pressed my face against the metal grate. Marco was in the room. He was sitting on the edge of the massive king-sized bed. The glowing tablet was resting on the mattress next to him. He was holding a sleek black handgun. He pulled the slide back, checking the chamber. A silver bullet gleamed in the dim light. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. He put it on speaker. "Yeah." "It is me." Marco grunted into the phone. "The biometric draft is done. I am sitting in the server room right now. As soon as the clock strikes midnight, I plug the tablet in and the transfer clears the international fraud block. $2 million will hit your offshore account at exactly 12:01. A rough voice crackled on the other end. "And what about the architect?" Marco smiled. He picked up the heavy black gun. He aimed it playfully at his own reflection in the vanity mirror. "Once the money clears." Marco laughed softly. "I am going downstairs to blow his brains out. Then I am going to find his mother." He hung up the phone. I looked at the digital clock glowing on the nightstand. It was 11:15. I had exactly 45 minutes to get that server. 45 minutes to save my son. But standing between me and the ultimate weapon was a violent killer with a loaded gun, just waiting for the clock to strike midnight. I closed my eyes in the dark. I gripped my bleeding hands into tight fists. I was not going to die in these walls. I was going to bring this entire house down on their heads. I waited in the freezing dark, watching the devil play with his gun. I pressed my face against the cold metal grate. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I watched Marco pace back and forth across the luxurious bedroom. He was holding the heavy black handgun. He pointed it at the wall, pretending to shoot. He was smiling. He was completely drunk on his own fake power. He walked over to a crystal decanter on a small glass table. He poured himself a large glass of amber whiskey. He swallowed it in one greedy gulp. Too easy. Marco muttered to himself. This was just too easy. He looked at the glowing tablet resting on the white silk sheets of the bed. The digital clock on the screen read 11:20. 40 minutes left until midnight. 40 minutes until the international banking firewall lowered its daily security check. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket vibrated loudly. Marco pulled it out and answered. I could hear the faint voice of Elena buzzing through the speaker. "Where are you?" Elena hissed. Her voice was tight with panic. "The senior partners are asking questions. Richard wants to make a toast to the merger right now. He is demanding that the family be present. I am guarding the server room." Marco growled. "I have to plug the tablet in at midnight." "It is not midnight yet," Elena snapped back. "The tablet is useless for another 40 minutes. If you do not come down here and show your face, Richard is going to get suspicious. He is already asking why the security guards look like mercenaries." Marco gritted his teeth. He hated taking orders from his sister. "Fine." Marco spat. "I will come down for 5 minutes. Keep them distracted." "Hurry up," Elena ordered. "And make sure the bedroom door is locked." Marco hung up the phone. He looked at the tablet on the bed. He looked at the heavy server wall hidden behind the painting. He smirked. He thought he had absolutely nothing to worry about. He thought my son was bleeding to death in the basement. He thought the old mother was sleeping peacefully in her cheap house across town. His arrogance was a blinding fog. It was going to be his grave. Marco tucked the handgun into his shoulder holster. He adjusted his expensive tie in the mirror. Then he walked out of the master suite. I heard the heavy electronic deadbolt slide shut with a loud mechanical clack. He had locked the door from the outside. The room was totally sealed. I was completely alone. I did not waste a single second. I pushed my bloody hands against the metal vent cover. It was screwed in tight. I gritted my teeth and pushed with all the strength I had left in my exhausted shoulders. The screws groaned and then snapped out of the drywall. The heavy metal grate popped loose. I pushed it aside. I squeezed my shoulders through the narrow opening and dropped. I hit the thick plush carpet of the bedroom floor hard. Pain shot up my knees like lightning. I bit my tongue to stifle a groan. I rolled over and forced myself to stand up. The master suite was freezing. The air conditioning was running on full blast. But I was sweating profusely. I wiped my bleeding hands on my ruined pants. I ran straight toward the massive abstract painting on the far wall. Mateo said the server was directly behind it. I ran my fingers along the heavy wooden frame of the painting. I felt for a hidden switch. A button. A lever. Anything. My fingers were numb and slick with blood. I panicked for a brief second. What if I could not find it? What if Marco came back early, then? My thumb brushed against a tiny indentation on the bottom edge of the frame. I pressed it hard. A green light flashed behind the canvas. With a soft, pneumatic hiss, the entire massive painting slid smoothly to the left. I stared in absolute awe. Hidden inside the wall was a glowing fortress of technology. Racks of black servers hummed quietly. Blue and green lights blinked in rapid succession. At the center of the rack was a sleek metal keyboard and a built-in monitor. This was the brain of the smart mansion. This was the true foundation. I stepped up to the console. The screen was completely locked. A red prompt demanded an administrator password. I closed my eyes. I took a deep, trembling breath. I remembered the day Mateo graduated from college. I had bought him a cheap plastic drafting pen because it was all I could afford. He cried and told me it was the best gift he had ever received. He told me he would build a castle for us one day. I opened my eyes. I typed in the password he had whispered to me in the dark basement. THE. PUN. Is. MEGHTEAR. I hit the enter key. The red screen vanished. A complex dashboard of house controls flooded the monitor. Security cameras, climate control, financial gateways. It was all there. I had complete and total access to the entire estate. My hands flew across the keyboard. I navigated to the local hard drive storage. I searched for the basement camera feeds. I clicked on the file time-stamped for tonight. The video popped up on the screen. It was high definition, crystal clear. I watched in horror as Marco dragged my son into the frame. I watched Elena stand by with a cold smile. I watched Marco raise a heavy metal wrench and bring it down violently on the right arm of my son. "You are going to sign over the trust fund," Marco yelled on the video. The audio was perfect. "Or I will hand your wife over to the cartel." I felt a fresh tear slide down my dirty cheek. But I did not cry out. My sorrow was gone. It had been completely replaced by a cold, calculating executioner. I selected the video file. I copied it. I routed it directly to the media center of the grand foyer downstairs. I linked it to the massive high-definition screens Marco had set up for the corporate presentation. Then, I looked at the financial gateway. The system was waiting for the biometric tablet to be plugged in. It was waiting to authorize the transfer of $2 million. I grabbed the tablet from the bed. I carried it over to the server rack. I found the master connecting cable. I plugged the tablet directly into the mainframe. The screen flashed. A prompt appeared. "Initiate trust fund transfer." I typed a new command. I revoked all authorizations for Marco. I revoked the power of attorney for Elena. I locked the accounts behind a massive digital firewall that only my son could open. I looked at the digital clock on the monitor. 11:55. 5 minutes until midnight. Downstairs. The music suddenly faded. I could hear the faint sound of a microphone feeding back. The toast was about to begin. Elena was about to stand in front of the wealthiest people in the city and claim her stolen crown. Marco was probably standing right beside her, smiling his wicked smile. They thought they had won. They thought they were untouchable. I navigated to the primary security dashboard. I found the emergency protocol Matteo had designed for extreme threats. It was labeled Absolute Lockdown. Once activated, thick steel shutters would drop over every door and window. The internal locks would freeze. The cellular jammers would activate. Nobody could get in, and absolutely nobody could get out. I hovered my trembling finger over the execute key. You wanted this house, I whispered to the empty room. Now you are going to die in it. I pressed the button. The heavy execute button sank beneath my trembling finger with a soft mechanical click. I held my breath, waiting. For a single terrifying second, absolutely nothing happened. The glowing screen of the server mainframe simply blinked. I thought I had failed. I thought the blood on my hands had ruined the keyboard. But then, the smart mansion woke up. Through the high-definition security monitors glowing in front of me, I watched the grand foyer transform. Downstairs, Elena was standing on the sweeping marble staircase. She had a fresh crystal glass of champagne in one hand and her sleek silver phone in the other. Richard, the senior partner of the firm, was raising his glass to the massive crowd of wealthy investors and lawyers. To a new era, Richard announced loudly, and to the speedy recovery of our brilliant founder. Matteo, the crowd murmured in polite agreement. They raised their glasses. The expensive party music thumped smoothly in the background. Elena smiled her perfect, plastic smile. She wiped a fake tear from her eye. Thank you all, she said, her voice echoing through the open hall. Matteo trusts me to guide his vision tonight. It is exactly midnight. I will now sign the final corporate merger. She raised her manicured finger. She hovered it over her glowing phone screen. She never touched it. The absolute lockdown protocol engaged with the force of a bomb. The thumping bass of the music was instantly severed. Total silence dropped over the foyer like a heavy blanket. The guests gasped in confusion. Then, the lights died. Every single crystal chandelier went completely dark. The crowd let out a collective shout of fear. 1 second later, the emergency lighting activated. Thick, pulsing red strobe lights began flashing violently along the baseboards and ceilings. The elegant foyer was suddenly bathed in the sinister crimson glow of a submarine preparing for war. "What is happening?" Elena shrieked. Dropping her silver phone, it clattered loudly down the marble stairs. Before anyone could answer, the real defense mechanisms deployed. A series of deafening mechanical crashes shook the very foundation of the house. Massive plates of solid steel dropped from hidden compartments in the ceilings. They slammed down over every single floor-to-ceiling glass window. They crashed over the grand glass entrance doors. The sound was like thunder trapped inside a metal box. The smart mansion was sealing itself. The wealthy guests began to panic. Women screamed and grabbed their husbands. Men in expensive suits pushed against each other, running blindly toward the front doors. But there was no way out. The steel shutters were military grade. The heavy magnetic locks had fused shut with thousands of pounds of force. The house was now a vault, and they were all trapped inside. I sat in the freezing server room, watching the chaos unfold on the monitors. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt my ribs, but I did not feel fear anymore. I felt an overwhelming surge of absolute power through the cameras. I saw Marco pushing violently through the terrified crowd. He had made it down to the first floor just as the lockdown hit. His face was pale with shock. The confident, arrogant smirk was completely gone. "Open the doors," Marco screamed at the private mercenaries he had hired. "Break the windows. Do it now." One of the massive guards ran to the front door. He slammed his shoulder against the steel shutter. It did not even rattle. "We cannot breach it." "Boss," the guard yelled over the panic. "The whole system is completely locked." Marco yanked his phone from his pocket. He stared at the screen in pure disbelief. "No signal," Marco muttered, his voice shaking. "There is no service. The Wi-Fi is completely dead." The digital jammers built into the walls of the mansion had activated. Matteo designed them to prevent hackers from accessing the network from the outside during an emergency. Now, those same jammers were cutting the villains off from their cartel bosses. No money could be transferred. No phone calls could be made. They were completely isolated from the rest of the world. Elena ran down the stairs in her bare feet, her high heels abandoned somewhere in the dark. She grabbed Marco by the lapels of his expensive jacket. "What did you do?" she screamed hysterically. "Did you break the server? The transfer did not go through." "I did not touch anything," Marco roared, pushing her away violently. He was losing his mind. He knew what the cartel would do to him if they did not get their money tonight. In his blind panic, Marco made his final fatal mistake. He reached under his jacket. He pulled out his heavy black handgun right in front of the entire crowd of investors and lawyers. The guests shrieked in absolute horror. They scrambled backward, tripping over each other in their expensive gowns and suits, trying to get away from the madman with a weapon. "Nobody moves," Marco screamed wildly, waving the gun at the terrified elite. "Guards, find the manual override. I will shoot the first person who tries to stop me." The mask was off. The elegant corporate takeover had just turned into a violent hostage situation. Richard and the other lawyers stared at Elena in pure disgust and terror. They finally realized they were not dealing with a grieving wife. They were dealing with violent criminals. I leaned forward in my chair. The cold metal of the server desk grounded me. It was time to introduce myself. I reached out and pressed the central intercom button on the dashboard. It connected directly to the massive surround sound speakers hidden all over the house. I leaned close to the microphone. "You cannot shoot a steel wall." "Marco." My voice boomed through the grand foyer. It echoed like the voice of a furious god. Downstairs, every single person froze. The screaming stopped. Marco whipped his head around, aiming his gun frantically at the ceiling. Elena covered her mouth with trembling hands. Her eyes were wide with pure terror. She recognized my voice instantly. "Who is that?" Marco yelled, his gun shaking in his hand. "Where are you?" "I am the woman who scrubbed floors to build this foundation." I spoke slowly, letting every single word drip with absolute venom. "I am the mother of the man you tortured in the dark. And tonight, none of you are leaving this house." The silence in the grand foyer was absolute. Hundreds of wealthy investors and powerful lawyers stood completely frozen in the pulsing red emergency light. They stared up at the ceiling, searching for the source of my voice. Elena dropped to her knees on the marble stairs. Her hands clutched her expensive silk gown. "It is a trick," Elena screamed wildly. She pointed a trembling finger at the ceiling. "The system is hacked. My mother-in-law is crazy. She is a poor old woman from the slums. She hates me. Do not listen to her, Richard." The senior partner took a slow step back from her. He looked at Marco, waving a loaded gun at the crowd. He looked at the private mercenaries blocking the steel doors. "Elena," Richard said, his voice shaking with sudden, terrifying realization. "Where is Matteo? He is sick," she cried out, tears streaming down her perfect face. "He is upstairs, I swear it." I sat in the freezing server room. I looked at the digital dashboard. I had locked the doors. I had cut off their money. But physical entrapment was not enough. They had tried to strip my son of his dignity. They had treated him like a piece of garbage in the dark. Now, I was going to strip them of everything they valued: their reputation, their high society status, their entire world. "He is not upstairs." "Richard." I spoke softly into the microphone. My voice echoed through every corner of the massive house. "He is chained to a chair in his own basement, and his wife put him there." I reached out and pressed the execute command for the media playback. The massive digital presentation screens behind the grand staircase suddenly flickered to life. The screens were supposed to display the corporate merger charts. Instead, they illuminated the dark foyer with the cold, black and white footage of the basement security feed. The video was crystal clear. The audio fed directly into the concert-quality sound system of the house. Every single person in the room turned to watch. On the massive screens, Marco dragged my beaten son into the frame. Elena stood in the background with a crystal glass of champagne. Her cold, empty smile was magnified 50 times its normal size for the entire elite society to see. "You are going to sign over the trust fund," Marco roared on the video, his voice vibrating the expensive crystal chandeliers above. "Or I will hand your wife over to the cartel," the crowd gasped. Several women covered their mouths in pure horror. Then, the wrench came down. The sickening sound of my boy breaking his arm echoed through the grand foyer. Matteo screamed on the video. He screamed in pure, absolute agony. And, on the screen, Elena took a delicate sip of her champagne and rolled her eyes. "Just do it, Matteo. Do not make this harder than it has to be." Her own cruel voice played back to her. The absolute proof of her betrayal. The reaction in the room was instantaneous. The wealthy investors backed away from the staircase as if Elena were carrying a deadly plague. Richard stared at the massive screens with wide, terrified eyes. "My God," Richard whispered. "You are monsters. You were going to use us as legal witnesses to a kidnapping." "No," Elena shrieked. She scrambled to her feet. She waved her hands frantically at the screens. "It is fake. It is artificial intelligence. She altered the video." "Shut up," Richard roared, his face turning bright red with fury. "You lied to all of us. You brought armed thugs to a corporate dinner. The deal is dead. Your life is completely over. The social mask of my daughter-in-law shattered into a million pieces." The elegant, supportive wife vanished. The greedy, desperate coward was exposed for the entire world to see. She realized she had lost the money. She had lost her status. She had lost her freedom. She turned her wild eyes toward her brother. "This was your idea," Elena screamed at Marco. "You owed the cartel $2 million. You dragged me into this. Do something." Marco was breathing heavily. His suit was drenched in cold sweat. He looked at the locked steel doors. He looked at the angry, terrified crowd. He looked at the video of himself committing a brutal felony on a loop. He was a cornered rat. And cornered rats bite. Marco raised his heavy black handgun. He aimed it directly at Richard. "Everybody get on the ground," Marco screamed, spitting saliva as he panicked. "I will kill all of you. I will shoot every single person in this room if someone does not open these doors." The crowd dropped to the marble floor, screaming and covering their heads. The private mercenaries lowered their weapons. They realized they were hired to guard a party. not to go down for an armed hostage situation. They backed away from Marco. "Open the doors," Marco yelled at the ceiling, pointing his gun blindly at the cameras. "Open them right now or I start shooting." I sat in the server room. My hand hovered over the intercom button. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Marco was unhinged. He was truly capable of murder. I had to keep the attention on me until help arrived. "If you pull that trigger..." "Marco," I said slowly and clearly, "the police will not arrest you. They will execute you on sight." "The police cannot get inside," he laughed hysterically. "You locked us all in, I locked you in." I corrected him. But the house called the authorities the exact second I pressed the button. Right on cue. A piercing sound cut through the heavy silence of the estate. It was faint at first, muffled by the thick steel shutters. But it grew louder and louder with every passing second. The wail of emergency sirens. Not just one patrol car. It sounded like an entire army. The Special Weapons and Tactics team had arrived. The wail of the sirens grew deafening. Through the security cameras, I watched the flashing red and blue lights paint the wet pavement outside the front gate. Heavy armored vehicles smashed through the pristine landscaping. Dozens of heavily armed Special Tactics officers swarmed the perimeter of the mansion. Inside the grand foyer, the panic reached a fever pitch. Marco was completely unhinged. He grabbed Elena by the arm and dragged her behind a marble pillar, waving his gun wildly at the locked steel shutters. "Back up!" Marco screamed at the terrified guests. "Everybody get back!" I reached over the glowing server console. I switched the audio feed from the internal house speakers directly to the external intercom system located at the front gate. "Police Commander." I spoke clearly into the microphone. My name is not important. But I am a mother protecting her child. I am in control of the house security system. There is an armed man inside holding dozens of hostages. My son is severely injured in the basement. I am going to open the front doors for you in exactly 10 seconds. Outside. The tactical commander lowered his heavy megaphone. He immediately signaled his men to stack up against the massive steel entrance. I switched the intercom back to the grand foyer. "Marco," I said, my voice echoing like cold thunder through the dark room. "Your time is completely up. 10. 9. "Shut up!" Marco shrieked. He aimed at the nearest security camera on the wall and fired. The loud crack of the gunshot made the guests scream and cover their ears. Sparks rained down. But shooting one camera did not stop the countdown. 8. 7. "Stop!" Elena cried out, falling to her knees and grabbing her brother by the leg. "They will kill us! Drop the gun, Marco." 6. 5. 4. I pressed the master override button on the digital console. 3. 2. 1. The heavy magnetic locks disengaged with a massive mechanical clank. The thick steel shutters covering the front entrance violently rolled upward. Before the metal was even halfway open, the tactical team breached. Police dropped the weapon. "Get on the ground." Multiple red laser sights cut through the dusty air, all converging directly on the chest of Marco. He froze. The heavy handgun trembled in his grip. He looked at the sea of black armor and assault rifles pouring into the foyer. He finally realized he was entirely outmatched. The gun slipped from his sweating fingers and clattered onto the polished marble floor. Officers tackled him instantly. They slammed his face into the cold stone, snapping heavy iron handcuffs onto his wrists. 2 other officers grabbed Elena. She did not fight. She just sobbed uncontrollably as they pulled her arms behind her back and cuffed her tight. All around them, the wealthy investors and lawyers pulled out their expensive phones. They were recording everything. The flashing cameras captured the total destruction of her perfect social mask. The woman who wanted to steal an empire was now just a weeping criminal in a ruined silk dress. I stood up from the server desk. My legs were shaking from exhaustion, but my spine was straight as steel. I unlocked the master bedroom door. I walked out into the hallway and made my way toward the grand staircase. I walked down the marble steps slowly. My clothes were torn and covered in dirt and dried blood from crawling in the walls. But I did not feel poor or weak. I felt like a queen descending into a conquered territory. Elena looked up through her tangled hair. When she saw me standing there, her eyes widened in absolute shock and despair. "Mom." She wept. Her voice a pathetic, desperate whisper. "Please." I had no choice. Marco forced me to do it. "Please tell them to let me go." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I looked down at the woman who had smiled while they broke the arm of my son. "You have no mother," I said quietly, "and you have absolutely nothing left." I did not waste another single second looking at her. I turned to the tactical commander. "My son is in the basement," I told him, pointing toward the hidden corridor. "He needs a doctor right now." I led the tactical medics down the dark utility corridor. My heart was in my throat as we reached the soundproof theater. The medics rushed in with heavy flashlights and thick bolt cutters. The heavy steel chains finally fell to the concrete floor with a loud metallic crash. They lifted my broken boy onto a portable stretcher. I held his cold left hand the entire way up the elevator. When the elevator doors opened into the grand foyer, the police had already cleared out the wealthy guests. Only Elena and Marco remained. They were sitting on the cold marble floor in heavy iron handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents. Elena looked up. Her expensive silk dress was completely ruined. Her perfect makeup was smeared with dark tears. She saw Matteo on the stretcher. "Matteo," she sobbed, trying to crawl toward him on her knees. "Please. I love you. Tell them I had nothing to do with the cartel. Tell them I am your wife." The paramedics paused for a single second. Matteo slowly turned his head. His face was a canvas of purple bruises and dried blood. But his eyes were incredibly clear. There was no fear left in him. "You are nothing to me," Matteo whispered, his voice weak but filled with absolute steel. "You died in that basement tonight." He did not look at her again. He squeezed my hand, and they wheeled him out into the cold rain toward the waiting ambulance. Elena wailed behind us, a pathetic and hollow sound that echoed uselessly inside her empty glass fortress. 6 months later, the smart mansion was sold at a government auction. Marco pleaded guilty to armed extortion and kidnapping to avoid the cartel hitmen waiting for him in maximum security. The judge gave him 40 years. Elena was convicted as a direct accomplice and for attempted murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. She lost every single penny she tried to steal. She lost her status. She lost her freedom. Today, Matteo and I live in a small wooden house on the quiet edge of the city. His right arm is still healing in a heavy cast. He works at his drafting table in the living room, drawing smaller, warmer homes. We do not have voice-activated lights or heavy steel shutters. We do not have crystal chandeliers. But as I set a hot cup of tea on his desk and he looks up to smile at me, I know we have something much stronger. A house made of steel and glass can easily become a deadly prison. But a true home, built on the fierce foundation of a mother's loyalty, can never be broken.